Listen to me carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is something no one's ever dared to say out loud. Not the therapists, not the dating coaches, not your best friend, and definitely not the avoidant themselves. But you need to hear it. You deserve to hear it. There's something people don't realize about avoidance because no one's ever told them how to look for it. We're conditioned to believe that love is loud, that it's big gestures, grand words, obvious confessions, a heart on a sleeve for the world to see. But for someone with an avoidant attachment style, love doesn't arrive that way. It sneaks up on them. It terrifies them. It fractures their carefully built image of control. And when it does, it doesn't come through a speech or a romantic proposal. It reveals itself in tiny, almost invisible moments so subtle the average person wouldn't notice. But if you're sharp, if you've lived through it, if you know what it feels like to have someone's soul silently tether itself to yours while their mouth says the opposite, you'll know what to watch for. The avoidant doesn't confess love when they feel it because to them, vulnerability is a threat. It's a weakness. It's a liability they've spent years training themselves to avoid. But no matter how practiced they are, no matter how detached they pretend to be, the heart betrays the mind when it's struck with something real. When you pull back, when you go quiet, when you stop chasing the avoidant, a shift happens in them that they can't predict. You stop feeding the cycle of their avoidance by refusing to prove your worth to them anymore, and suddenly they're left alone with their own thoughts. And for someone whose entire coping mechanism is based around avoiding discomfort, this is unbearable. What happens next is the moment no one teaches you about. It's when the avoidant begins to realize that your absence hits differently, not because of ego, not because of control, but because it triggers a part of them they swore they didn't have. It stirs the very emotions they claimed weren't real, the attachment they said they didn't feel, the connection they swore wasn't deep. And it doesn't explode in some cinematic outpouring. It leaks out in the smallest, most unintentional ways. You'll catch it in a message that makes no sense, a check in that feels out of character. You'll sense it in a random reaction to your social media, a comment on something personal, a reply to something they would have ignored before. It will come at strange times, maybe late at night when defenses are down, or early in the morning when they're too tired to maintain the mask. It will come in nostalgia, in a mention of a memory you thought they'd long forgotten. It might come in a clumsy, half-hearted apology that isn't about making things right, but about testing the waters to see if the door is still open. This is not accidental. This is not meaningless. This is the avoidance heart screaming through a whisper because their survival brain won't let them say it any louder. The dangerous part is if you don't recognize this for what it is, you'll miss it. You'll dismiss it as random. You'll overlook it. But this is the avoidance language. It's the only way they know how to say, and you got under my skin and I don't know what to do with it, because no one taught them how to stay. No one showed them that it's safe to lean in. And so when their guard drops, even for a second, it feels like free falling into the unknown. That's why it comes out sideways. That's why it's a text about a song you used to play, a meme you would have laughed at, a question about a plan you once made together. It's not small talk. It's them testing whether you still exist in their world. It's them confronting the your absence left. People think avoidants are unfeeling, detached, immune to loss. They aren't. They feel everything. They just bury it. They shove it down under layers of control, independence, and rationalization. But feelings buried alive never die. They fester. They evolve. And when left unchecked, they haunt. That's why your silence is louder than your words to them. Because when you were chasing them, validating them, proving yourself, you gave them an excuse to stay distant. You gave them a role to play. The one who was always slightly out of reach, always one step ahead, always protected. But when you stop, you shatter the dynamic. And suddenly they're forced to face the weight of their own emotions without the buffer of your pursuit. That's when the quiet moments start happening. not the grand, dramatic declarations people are conditioned to expect from love stories. Real attachment for an avoidant is a war inside them. It's the battle between a heart that craves connection and a brain that believes closeness is dangerous. So when you see that small, awkward, hesitant text, or when you catch them showing up in your orbit after weeks of distance, you're witnessing that war. You're seeing the side of them they don't show the world, and it means you mattered more than they admitted. It means you carved out a place inside them that even they can't escape. Most people don't wait long enough to witness this. Most people, hurt by the avoidance distance, move on, and sometimes they should. But if you ever find yourself in a moment where the avoidant circles back in these tiny, fractured ways, know this isn't random. It's the loudest scream their heart can make without their defenses shutting it down. And what you do next matters. Because this isn't an invitation to chase again. It's not a cue to rescue them. It's not a sign to flood them with attention. It's a signal to stand still, to let them navigate their own feelings, to let them realize for themselves what your presence truly meant. This is where most people fail. They mistake those small moments for a reconciliation. They rush in, desperate to rekindle the connection, only to find the avoidant pulling away again. But if you understand what's really happening, you'll recognize this as the avoidant's first step toward confronting their own capacity for attachment. It's messy, it's inconsistent, it's incomplete. But it's real, and that makes it powerful, because a person who's spent their entire life running from closeness doesn't pause for just anyone. They don't accidentally remember your laugh, or care about your silence, or wonder how you've been at 3 a.m. unless you meant something. This is their heart losing the war, little by little. Every avoided text, every ignored memory, every suppressed emotion resurfaces in these moments. And the avoidant has no choice but to feel it, even if they don't understand it, even if they deny it, even if they tell themselves it's nothing. Their actions will betray their true feelings. And that's what you pay attention to. Not their words, not their excuses, but the moments when their soul slips through the cracks. Because if you catch it, if you notice it, you'll see they're in far deeper than even they realize. Your real power in this entire dynamic isn't in what you say to them. It's in what you refuse to say, in the moments you choose not to chase, not to explain, not to beg for clarity, and not to try to convince them of your worth. Because people who run from love aren't waiting to be convinced. They're waiting to be confronted by a silence loud enough to echo through the spaces they swore no one would ever reach. And this is the truth no one tells you about avoidance and people who fear intimacy. They don't wake up one day ready to love you because you finally proved yourself. They don't come back because your persistence wore them down. They come back when the absence of your attention becomes more unbearable than the terror of closeness. And most people get this wrong. Most people believe if they just say the right thing, send the perfect message, explain their feelings one more time, show how understanding and patient they can be, that the avoidant will suddenly see the light and stop running. But that's not how this works. You cannot love a person into healing if they're still committed to hiding from themselves. And every time you chase someone whose coping mechanism is withdrawal, you don't prove your value. You reinforce their fear, because what you're showing them is that love invades, love insists, love demands to be let in. And for someone terrified of attachment, that's confirming everything they already believed, that closeness is a trap. And no matter kind or pure your intentions are, to them it feels like suffocation dressed in affection. And that's why the ones who actually win in these situations, the ones who leave an impact avoidance can't shake, aren't the ones who prove their love louder. They're the ones who do something far more terrifying to the avoidant mind. They stay still. When you stop chasing, you dismantle the entire dynamic. You refuse to play the role the avoidant subconsciously cast you in. And that's when something remarkable happens, because now the avoidant is forced to confront something they've spent their entire life avoiding, their own feelings, their own discomfort, the gnawing H of wanting someone they pushed away, and because avoidance only works when the person you're avoiding keeps reaching out, keeps showing up, keeps validating the story in your head that says love will always try to trap you. But when you go silent, when you leave them alone with their own thoughts, their own memories, their own regrets, it creates a discomfort so deep it scrapes at the very identity they built to protect themselves. And at first they'll rationalize it. They'll tell themselves they don't care, that you were never that important, that they're better off alone. But avoidance isn't strength. It's a trauma response dressed in control. And no one can outrun their own heart forever. That silence becomes a mirror, a merciless reflection of the truth they don't want to face, that they did feel something, that they are attached. That maybe for the first time in a long time, they found someone who touched a nerve so deep it scared them. And now, without the distraction of your constant presence, without the reassurance of your attention, all they have left is the emptiness your absence left behind, and it stings in places they don't have words for, because people who are used to avoiding connection have never learned how to process longing. And what makes it worse for them is that now they can't blame you for it, because you didn't chase, you didn't push, you didn't beg, you just disappeared. And that makes the H theirs to own. This is how people change, not through pressure, not through lectures, not through romantic speeches, but through quiet confrontations with their own patterns, when the person they took for granted is no longer standing in front of them, when the safety net they swore they didn't need vanishes, when the chase ends and the silence begins, because it's in that silence that the avoidant finally has to feel. And as much as they fight it, as much as they tell themselves they're fine, it eats at them, because the absence of your validation removes their excuse to stay emotionally lazy, and it forces them to ask themselves the questions they've been avoiding. Why do I care? Why does this hurt? Why can't I stop thinking about them? And those questions become louder than any words you could have spoken. Most people will never see this side of the avoidant because they can't bear to stay still long enough. They either chase too soon or walk away too bitter. But the rare ones who get it, the ones who understand the power of holding their ground, those are the ones the avoidant can't forget. Because it's not easy to replace someone who didn't demand love, who didn't smother them, who didn't need to be chosen to know their own worth, because that kind of presence makes a person question everything they thought they knew about connection. And when you show someone that you can want them without needing them, when you show them you can care deeply and still walk away with dignity, you become the lesson their heart needed and their ego never saw coming. That's where your real power lies, not in proving your worth, but in being so anchored in it that you don't need to prove it at all. And that rattles a person who relies on avoidance, because it forces them to confront the possibility maybe not everyone's love is invasive. Maybe not everyone will demand access to them. Maybe connection doesn't have to equal suffocation. And maybe, just maybe, they lost something rare when they lost you. And this isn't about playing games. It's about understanding human psychology, about knowing that people don't change unless discomfort outweighs the fear. And nothing makes an avoidant more uncomfortable than being left alone with their own emotions. That's when the walls start to crack, not because you pushed them down, but because the person behind them got tired of living in the dark, and they'll start to feel the absence of your presence like a phantom limb, noticing you in every song, every street, every inside joke, every quiet moment when no one else is around, because it's easy to forget a person who begged for you, but it's impossible to forget the one who loved you quietly and left without burning the room down, because now the avoidant has no one to blame for the H but themselves, and that changes people in ways your words never could. If you've ever dealt with an avoidant, you know their patterns are like clockwork. They pull close just enough to keep you invested and then vanish the moment things get too real. They pretend they don't care, act indifferent, shrug off emotion like it's nothing, and build walls so high you start to believe you imagined the connection altogether. But what no one tells you, what no one teaches you, because it's not in the books and it's not in the surface level relationship advice, is that when an avoidant breaks their own pattern, it's not by accident, it's not random, it's not a meaningless coincidence. It's their heart staging a silent rebellion against their own survival instincts. And the tragedy is that most people miss it because it looks so small, so insignificant, so out of character that it gets overlooked. But in those tiny broken patterns, the truth is screaming louder than it ever did when they were pulling away, avoidant, terrified of vulnerability, because to them, it's a direct line to pain, and their entire identity has been constructed around avoiding pain. They aren't heartless, they're self-protective, they aren't cold, they're scared, and they've built a life around control, distance, and emotional detachment because somewhere along the line, they learned that closeness costs you everything. But what no one ever factors in is what happens when they actually fall for someone, because when real attachment hits, the avoidant isn't prepared. And the body always betrays the mind. Eventually, the soul can only suppress what it feels for so long before it starts leaking out in actions. And the first sign is always when they start breaking their patterns. It won't be big. It won't be a love letter or a confession at your doorstep. It'll be a like on an old photo, a random check-in message, a question about your life they once acted like they didn't care about. It'll be a shared memory, a moment of nostalgia they swore they forgot. It'll be a text at a weird hour or a comment they quickly delete because their head is still telling them to run, but their heart is starting to crack through the walls. And most people don't catch it because they're too busy being angry at the distance, too hurt by the coldness to notice the warmth trying to crawl through the cracks. But if you pay attention, you'll see it. The avoidant who swore they were fine starts orbiting you in ways that don't make sense. They'll ghost for weeks and then pop up out of nowhere with a message that means nothing on the surface but is everything underneath, because avoidants don't do small talk for no reason. If they're reaching out, it's because you've been on their mind so long it's starting to drive them insane. And since they don't know how to confront those emotions directly, they'll test the water in the safest way they can, pretending it's casual, pretending it's nothing, but it's everything. The biggest mistake you can make in that moment is trying to drag them into a conversation about feelings they aren't equipped to have. What you need to do is stand still and let them come to terms with what's happening inside them, because it's the break in their own behavior that terrifies them more than anything you could say. And if you rush in too fast, they'll retreat even harder because their fear of suffocation will override their need for connection. But if you let them feel the full weight of their own discomfort, something happens that no amount of words could ever achieve. They start recognizing the pattern isn't working anymore. The silence isn't soothing them. The distance isn't protecting them. And your absence isn't bringing them peace. It's bringing them unrest. When an avoidant reaches out in those small, hesitant ways, it's not about the words. It's about the crack in the armor, the shift in their predictable detachment. And that is your signal, not to close the distance, not to chase, not to fill the silence, but to acknowledge that they're in deeper than even they realize. Because someone who truly didn't care wouldn't notice your absence, wouldn't remember the details, wouldn't find reasons to touch base, no matter how trivial. When people who fear closeness start breaking their avoidance cycle, it's because the pull inside them has become stronger than their instinct to run. And it's messy, it's slow, it's inconsistent, but it's real. The irony is that avoidants fall the hardest, tiresome, because when they finally care, it costs them more than it costs anyone else, because they've spent their entire lives pretending they didn't need anyone. And when you become the exception to that, when you become the name that sits heavy in their chest at night, they'll try to fight it with everything they have. But their actions will betray them, because no one circles back to a person they've emotionally detached from. No one reappears in the life of someone who didn't matter. And no one breaks their own carefully crafted pattern unless something inside them is losing the war. You don't need to interrogate it. You don't need to demand explanations. You don't need to prove yourself all over again. You just need to let it be what it is, a sign that they're unraveling in a way even they don't fully understand. And whether they admit it or not, that's your proof that you mattered more than they'll ever say, because attachment doesn't always announce itself with declarations and affection. Sometimes it announces itself with a like on your post at 1 a.m., with a "Hey, how you been?" when they swore you didn't cross their mind, with a remembered inside joke, a double take glance when you pass by. And those moments are the loudest things a feral heart can muster. So if you notice them doing these things, don't misread it. Don't dismiss it. Don't get pulled into old cycles. Just understand that you're witnessing the first cracks in the wall, the signs that they're in deeper than they've ever admitted to themselves. And that's not your cue to fix them or save them. It's your reminder that your presence left an imprint, your absence echoes, and that no matter how hard they try to act indifferent, their actions are telling the story their words never will.